As a result of the Versailles Treaty, an intergovernmental organisation was to be established to prevent further wars through collective security and disarmament.
In the courtyard of London's St. James's Palace, diplomats came and went as the nations decided the shape and form of a new international organisation. Its title, the League of Nations. Among the top-hatted British, French, Italian and Japanese, no Americans were to be seen. In spite of President Wilson's dreams, the United States had decided to keep out of Europe's future affairs. A decision to prove in the long run not only a pity, but a disaster.
By December 1920, 48 states had signed the covenant, pledging to eliminate aggression between countries. Disarmament was high on the agenda for all concerned. In 1924, British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald addressed the delegates.
The armed nations must be prepared to make their contribution in disarmament. The disarmed nation wants justice and freedom. An adjournment pure and simple would be the most heart-breaking confession of failure that this conference could indulge.
And then there were such treaties as the Locarno Pact. Negotiated in Locarno, Switzerland, and then signed in London on December 1st, 1925, this was a treaty to secure post-World War I territories and paved the way for Germany's admission into the League in 1926.
Traditional opponents of Germany, like France, that's Monsieur Briand, kept their true thoughts to themselves, but still they let her in.
And with Germany among its members, the League awaited its new headquarters.
Over the mountains, the stalwart Alps, in the tranquil air of Switzerland, the leaders of the nations, Germany included, were meeting for further discourses within the League of Nations. The search for peace might be long, yet there was no lack of searching. Indeed, so strong was faith that by the Lake of Geneva, a permanent home was a-building.
By the early 1930s, failings within the League were starting to emerge. The Japanese had been original members, but after the invasion of Manchuria, their position became untenable.
Japan's forceful infiltration into Johor, coming so soon after her Manchurian annexation, put before the League of Nations a test case. And who knew? Maybe if Japan was intimidated, she might even walk out of the League for good. For Japan was riding high. All the same, at Geneva, Japan was duly censured for her actions. The Chinese delegate said,
Today, because of the lust and usurpation of power by her military chieftains, who are bent on defying the international instruments of peace and the force of world opinion, Japan finds herself all alone.
And this was Japan's answer.
Then, in October 1933, Hitler, as the newly elected Chancellor of Germany, withdrew from the disarmament conference, removed his country from the League of Nations, and started to rearm. Actions that contributed to numerous German nationals abandoning their place of birth. Albert Einstein sought exile in America.
Of securing and maintaining peace, but also with the important task of education and enlightenment. Without such freedom, there would have been no Shakespeare, no Goethe, no Newton, no Faraday, no Pasteur, and no Lister.
These withdrawals were setbacks the League could do little about, and matters only got worse when Italy invaded Ethiopia, starting the Second Italo-Abyssinian War.
The tramp of soldiers' feet again, oft-times bare. For a year, the drums had beat in Ethiopia, calling the tribesmen to the defense of their country. The battle was now nearly over, but though the end was near, morale was still high. March and train, march and countermarch, with spears, bows and arrows, antiquated rifles, muskets and shotguns, these pathetic weapons against a conqueror who had taken the sword to become, as he had claimed, Islam's protector. But Il Duce's protection meant for Ethiopia the onslaught of tanks, guns, and bombing planes. And against such force, spears and courage were not enough.
In May 1936, the war ended, and Italy declared Ethiopia part of an Italian empire. Emperor Haile Selassie sought exile in Britain. He then went to the League of Nations to speak for his country. Selassie did not get the full support he requested and returned to the UK, where he remained in exile until Ethiopia was liberated during the Second World War. But in the summer of 1936, the world's nations came together under a veneer of friendliness.
In Berlin, an open Mercedes rolled through the streets towards the stadium specially built for the Olympic Games, bearing to the scene Germany's VIP of all VIPs. Then the torch arrived from Greece, and in the presence of Adolf Hitler, the flame was lit. The games were on. Flags flying together, the nation's athletes marching shoulder to shoulder, regardless of color or creed, binding the ties in a common bond of sportsmanship. Yes, it was all very hail fellow, well met. But when the doves of peace flew upwards over the Führer's head, it was into a sky not as cloudless as it might have been for such an occasion.
By 1937, despite a new home, the League of Nations was struggling to fulfill its aims, and there was a growing lack of belief in its effectiveness amongst its members.
The League, the dream, the hope. In the last few years, peace in the form of collective security, which was the aim of the League, had suffered several unpleasant setbacks. And though delegates might try to put a good face on things, it could not be denied that Japan's walkout, Italy's conquest of Abyssinia, and Europe's general rearmament trend were bad omens for the future.